They left her there, tied to the post, paralyzed from the waist down, helpless as the flames rose higher. The crackle of burning timber became her death song, a cruel symphony played for an audience too frightened to move, too hardened to care. Smoke curled through the rafters, ash fell like gray snow, and the night glowed with the hungry light of destruction. Her eyes reflected the fire, wide and unblinking, not with surrender but with the last stubborn edge of defiance. She could not move her legs, could not run, could not crawl, but she would not scream for mercy. She refused to give them that. And just as the world seemed to close in on her, a silhouette appeared through the smoke, a lone raider cresting the edge of the firelight, his figure outlined in molten orange, like a ghost carried by the desert wind. The town lay in the hollow of the desert, a scattering of sun-baked boards and cracked clay, hemmed by hills that were more bone than stone. Even in daylight, it felt abandoned by the hand of God, but at night the place seemed cursed. Dry winds whispered through broken fences. Tumbleweed rolled along the main street, past shuttered windows where children peered out, their parents holding them back. This was a town that had learned silence, silence in the face of gangs, silence in the face of cruelty. Tonight, that silence was deafening. The barn at the edge of town had been little more than a shelter for weary horses and grain sacks, but the outlaws turned it into a stage. They dragged her there at dusk, while the sky still bled red from the setting sun. Nala, the Apache woman whose spine had been shattered years before in a fall from a horse, had been a ghost of rumor among settlers. Some said she was a witch, others said she was cursed, and some whispered that she had seen too much and survived too long. She had been carried by her people across deserts, hidden from soldiers, kept alive by sheer force of will. And yet here she was, bound to a wooden post with ropes that bit into her wrists, the fire rising around her. Her face, sharp and strong despite the smoke, revealed more than fear. She had endured more than most could imagine, raids that cut down her kin, treaties that broke her land apart, betrayal from both sides of a border that saw her people as less than human. Her legs had failed her years ago, but her spirit had never bent. That spirit was precisely why Jeb Crow chose her. Crow was a tall, rangy man with a face half hidden beneath a beard and eyes that burned with spite more than hunger. He led his gang like a pack of wolves too mean to die, dust-coated men who rode with pistols loose on their hips and laughter in their throats. They'd raided towns, ambushed caravans, and left bodies in shallow graves along canyon trails. To them, cruelty wasn't just a weapon, it was a kind of entertainment. Tonight, they chose their theater in fire. "She's good kindling," Crow had said, tossing a torch onto the straw at her feet. His voice carried across the dirt like a taunt. "Let her smoke rise, and maybe the wind will carry her spirit where her legs can't take her." His men laughed, their shadows twitching against the orange glow. Some townsfolk had gathered a distance, huddled in fearful clusters. They said nothing, did nothing, for to oppose Crow was to invite ruin. A few mothers clutched their children tighter, turning them away from the sight, but no one stepped forward. Nala did not cry. She kept her chin lifted even as the smoke stung her eyes. The flames licked higher, and sparks danced in her hair. In that moment, the weight of centuries of survival pressed into her gaze. Women before her who had carried babies across desert marches, men who had fought until the arrows split their skin, children who had sung songs under starlight even while soldiers came to take them away. Nala held them all inside her, and if this was to be her end, she would face it as they had. But the fire had its own hunger, and soon it became more than show. The timbers cracked, the air roared, and the heat drove even the outlaws back a few paces. Crow smiled, proud of his spectacle, but even he shielded his eyes from the brilliance of the blaze. Townsfolk muttered from the shadows, caught between pity and terror, their feet nailed to the ground by fear. Then came the sound, the slow, steady clop of hooves on the hardened dirt road. It cut through the roar of fire, steady as a drumbeat, drawing every head toward the main street. Out of the haze came a rider, moving unhurried, as if summoned by the flames themselves. The horse was dark, its mane streaked with dust, its eyes catching the firelight. The man upon it sat tall, though his hat brim shadowed his face. His silhouette was cut sharp against the burning barn, each step of the horse ringing like an omen. The outlaws shifted, laughter fading into mutters. Crow spat, squinting through the smoke. "Ain't no man with sense rides into fire like that," he muttered. His hand slid toward the pistol on his hip. The townsfolk held their breath, eyes wide, hearts trembling between hope and disbelief. To them, this figure could have been anything: a fool, a savior, a ghost out of the desert. The children whispered, clutching their mother's skirts. The fire cast the rider in hues of red and gold, his shape flickering like a vision half-born from legend. Nala's head turned toward the sound, her throat tightening though she made no sound. She could not know who he was, nor why he came. All she knew was that someone had come, and in the heart of fire, that was enough. The barn groaned, its beams bowing inward as the blaze consumed it. Sparks rained from the roof like fiery hail. Nala's bindings blackened, the wood she leaned against beginning to char. Her skin flushed hot, the air nearly unbreathable. She closed her eyes, her lips moving silently in prayer to the spirits of her ancestors, asking only that she face her death with dignity. The horse stepped closer, rider unmoving, as if carved from stone. Crow barked at him, his voice cracking against the heat. "Best turn around, stranger. Unless you're looking to roast with her." His gang snickered, though unease cut through their laughter. The rider did not turn. He did not speak. He only kept moving, the horse's hooves crunching through dirt and ember. Closer. Always closer. The air bent with heat around him, the outline of his figure wavering like a mirage. By now, every eye in the town was fixed on him. Mothers stopped praying, men stopped whispering, even Crow's gang held their breath. The fire roared, the smoke billowed, and into that inferno the lone figure rode, his arrival as unexplainable as the desert wind itself. The last thing the crowd saw before the smoke swallowed him was the horse breaking into a run, muscles taut, mane flying, carrying its raider straight into the heart of the flames. The world seemed to pause, the fire snapping louder, the townsfolk leaning forward, Crow's mouth parting with a curse, and then the night closed in around the rider, leaving only fire, only smoke, and the faint echo of hooves pounding into hell itself. And for the first time, fear crossed Jeb Crow's face. Elias Mercer was not a man who drew attention. He lived on the outskirts of the valley, where the mesquite trees grew twisted and the soil cracked like old leather. His ranch was small, a few head of cattle, a patch of corn stubborn enough to cling to life in the desert's thirst, and a cabin that leaned in the wind as though tired of standing. He rarely came into town except to trade hides or pick up salt and flour. Folks said he was a ghost of the war years, a man who had seen too much and spoken too little since. They were right. His face bore the marks of it, creases etched deep as canyon walls, eyes dulled by memories he never spoke of. His hair had gone gray at the edges though he was not yet 50, and his hands, though steady, shook sometimes when they touched a rifle too long. Elias had once been a scout in the Confederate ranks, slipping through forests and swamps, marking trails that others would follow into blood. After the war, he drifted west, trying to outrun the things he'd done, the lives he'd led to slaughter. But a man can't outrun the shadows of his own making. They cling. They whisper. The frontier gave him space, but it didn't give him peace. Nights were filled with silence that pressed on him like a weight. Sometimes he woke to the crack of phantom rifles, the cries of men long dead, and the copper taste of guilt in his throat. He lived with it because there was nothing else to do. A man like him had no place among townsfolk. No church would welcome him. No family would claim him. So Elias built fences, fixed saddles, and kept his distance. The desert, at least, never asked for forgiveness. Yet there was one story he carried like a talisman, though he never told a soul. Years back, when his drifting brought him near the Apache lands, he had been caught between hunger and thirst, fevered and half-dead. Soldiers had abandoned him, and the desert had nearly finished the job. It was an Apache boy, barely grown, who found him. The boy gave him water from a gourd, covered him with a blanket of rabbit skin, and led him to a hidden spring. Elias had expected an arrow in the back. Instead, he found mercy. The boy said little, only watched with sharp, dark eyes as Elias drank and regained strength. That moment had carved itself into him, a life given back by someone who had every reason to let him die. He never forgot it. He never forgot the weight of a kindness he hadn't deserved. So when Elias rode into town that night and saw the barn ablaze, saw the Apache woman tied to the post with fire curling hungrily around her, his chest tightened with a pain deeper than fear. The townsfolk stood far back, their faces orange with reflected flame, their silence as loud as any gunshot. They knew her fate. They had already accepted it. To them, she was nothing but a burden of trouble, paralyzed, unwanted, a mark for cruelty. To Elias, she was the face of the debt he had never repaid. He guided his horse to the edge of the street, pulling it to a halt as the heat licked his skin. Sparks bit at his clothes, and the smell of burning wood mixed with the acrid sting of hair singed by flame. He saw her there, her body bound, her face steady, her eyes blazing brighter than the fire itself. She was not begging. She was waiting. From the corner of his vision, Elias saw Jeb Crow and his men, their silhouettes leaning easy against fence rails, pistols hanging loose, grins wide. They looked at him with the smirks of men who had played this game before and never lost. Crow spat, his voice carrying. "Don't step into it, Oldman. Ain't your fight. That woman's fate ain't worth the bullets you'll catch." Elias did not answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman. Behind him, he heard whispers from the townsfolk. "Mercer's fool enough. He'll get himself killed. Ain't no saving her." Fear wrapped their words, and fear kept their feet rooted. Elias swung off his horse with slow deliberation. He tied the reins to a post, as though he were simply stepping into the saloon for a drink. Then he moved to the water trough. He grabbed the wooden bucket, plunged it deep, and hauled it up, the water sloshing over his hands. Without hesitation, he tipped it over himself, soaking his hat, his coat, the shirt clinging wet to his back. He filled the bucket again and doused his horse, the animal shuddering but standing steady. He worked quick, efficient, a man who'd done this before, not for show, but for survival. Crow laughed, a sharp bark cutting through the crackle of fire. "Look at that. He thinks he's riding into glory. Ain't no glory waiting in there, Mercer. Only ash." His men chuckled, but unease lingered in their eyes. They'd seen the fire eat stronger men. Elias adjusted the cinch on the saddle, his hand steady. He pulled a cloth from his pack, soaked it, and tied it across his mouth and nose. His eyes lifted once to the woman again. She met his gaze. For the briefest moment, the roar of the fire fell away, the voices of the gang disappeared, and it was just the two of them across that gulf of flame and smoke. She did not speak, but something in her eyes told him she understood, that this wasn't just about her life. It was about his soul. He swung back onto the saddle. The horse shifted, ears flat against its head, nostrils flaring against the heat. Elias patted its neck, whispering low words that only the animal could hear. The kind of words a man spoke when asking not just for obedience, but for trust. From the crowd, a voice called out, shrill with desperation. "Mercer, don't do it. You'll never come back out." Another voice followed, quieter but resolute. "Let her go, Elias. Let her go." But Elias had already made his choice. He had made it years ago, when an Apache boy bent down and gave him water instead of death. This was the path laid before him, and he would ride it whether it ended in salvation or flame. He nudged the horse forward. The gang fell silent. Crow's grin faltered. The townsfolk held their breath as the animal's hooves thudded against the dirt, slow at first, then quicker. The fire stretched ahead, a wall of shifting red and gold, alive and furious. Heat slammed into him, the air rippling, smoke clawing into his lungs even through the damp cloth. The horse balked, but Elias pressed his heels into its sides, guiding it onward. The barn moaned as its beams split, and sparks whirled like fireflies in a storm. The flames towered, reaching out with fingers of orange and blue. Elias lowered his head, gripped the reins tight, and let the horse break into a charge. For a heartbeat, all sound vanished. There was only the pounding of hooves, the rush of air, and the sudden, consuming roar as they crossed the threshold into fire. The world turned white with heat, red with fury. Smoke wrapped around him, blinding, choking, tearing tears from his eyes. Embers bit his skin like 1,000 stings. And then the fire swallowed them whole. The flames closed around him like the jaws of a beast, heat blistering his skin as smoke clawed at his throat. Elias decked low in the saddle, eyes stinging, and drove his horse through the inferno. For a heartbeat, it was as if the world had ended. Light too bright to bear, heat too fierce to endure, until suddenly the blur of fire broke and he saw her. Nala, bound to the charred post, her hair singed at the edges, her face fierce even as the flames licked closer. He leapt from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground hard. Sparks scattered beneath him, the floor already alive with fire. His knife flashed in the glow, cutting through the ropes at her wrists. Her skin was raw where the bindings had bitten, but her eyes locked on him, unblinking, as if daring him not to fail. He caught her under the arms, lifting her as the beams above groaned. Her body was light, too light for a woman grown, but her weight pressed against him like a vow. The fire did not wait. It roared, beams collapsing, sparks exploding in cascades. Elias staggered toward the open side of the barn. Nala clutched to his chest, when the sharp crack of a rifle split the night. A bullet screamed past, punching into a burning plank, throwing splinters across his arm. He turned, and through the smoke he saw Crow's gang, silhouettes against the blaze, their pistols raised. The bastards had not left, they had stayed to watch, and now they meant to finish the show with lead. Elias dropped behind a half-fallen beam, shielding Nala with his body as bullets tore through the timbers. The wood sparked and shattered, the gunfire mixing with the shriek of fire until the whole world was thunder. His revolver was in his hand before thought caught up. He fired blind at first, muzzle flash sparking against the dark, then rose just high enough to take aim. One outlaw pitched back, clutching his chest, swallowed by firelight. Nala tugged weakly at his shirt, her voice raw but steady. Left side, they move there. Her eyes, sharp even in the chaos, cut through the smoke with a clarity his couldn't. Elias swung his revolver and fired where she told him. A shadow fell, cursing as he went. Another gun barked from the right, close. Elias twisted, pain lancing through his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, burning flesh and tearing cloth. He hissed but didn't falter. He could bleed later. The barn shuddered, rafters splitting, one crashing down with a spray of sparks that nearly swallowed them both. Elias hauled Nala tighter against him, teeth grit. Her voice came again, calm, commanding despite her broken body. Not that way. Behind you, the wall's weaker. Break through it. He looked and saw it, a section already half devoured by fire, the boards brittle. He could smash through with a horse, if they lived long enough to reach it. Gunfire tore into the beam above his head. He fired back, each shot measured, each one a prayer that the chamber would not run dry too soon. But as the bullets rang, so too did memories. The heat and smoke pulled him backward into another fire, years ago, when he had led men through a swamp at night. Torches had flared, screams had followed, and he had run, left them behind when the ambush closed in. He could still hear their voices, men calling his name, calling for help, and he had not turned. That failure had ridden with him ever since. And now, in this fire, holding this woman, he swore he would not fail again. Another bullet tore past, grazing Nala's hair. She did not flinch. Her hands, weak though they were, pressed against his chest, steadying him. "Wait," she whispered, listening past the crackle. Then, more urgently, "Now. Go now." He trusted her. Without question, Elias surged to his feet, half carrying, half dragging her to the horse. The animal screamed against the heat, eyes rolling white, but it did not rear. Elias shoved Nala into the saddle, securing her with one arm while gripping the reins with the other. Shots rang out, 2, 3, splinters flying from the ground at their feet. He fired back, one outlaw collapsing in a sprawl of dust and smoke. Then he drove his heels into the horse. It lunged forward, and Elias bent low, covering Nala with his body as they tore across the barn. The weakened wall loomed ahead, glowing red, boards bowing inward. The outlaws shouted, their bullets chasing, one striking Elias in the side. He gasped, heat and pain fusing into a white blur, but he did not let go. His hand stayed clenched on the reins, his body shielding hers as the horse thundered on. The wall broke with an explosion of splinters and sparks. For an instant, it was as if the fire tried to hold them, arms of flame reaching out, grasping, burning. Then the boards gave way, and they burst into the night air. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a roar, timbers crashing inward, sparks leaping into the sky like fireworks. The ground shook beneath the fall, and smoke billowed out in a rolling wave. The horse ran hard, Elias clutching Nala against him, blood soaking his side, heat seared into his flesh. He did not look back. He could not. The night opened before them, desert wind rushing cool and sharp against a burn of fire, carrying them away from the inferno. Nala clung to him, her eyes fierce though her body trembled. She had been bound, broken, abandoned, but she had not been lost. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke, but it carried the weight of iron. "You are not done yet. They will come." Elias's jaw tightened. His breath came ragged, blood slicked beneath his shirt, but his grip on the reins was unyielding. He knew she was right. Crow and his men were not finished. The fire had not been the end. It had only been the beginning. The desert swallowed them, stars glimmering cold above the smoke, and behind them, the outlaws' rage rose like the howl of wolves who had lost their prey. The desert wind cooled the burns on Elias's skin, though each breath cut like glass in his lungs. He had ridden hard until the smoke no longer chased the stars, until the horse staggered from exhaustion, and only then had he guided it down into a canyon where shadows pooled thick and the rocks rose like guardians. He eased Nala down, setting her gently against the stone. She did not cry out, though her arms trembled from the strain. Her hair smelled of smoke, her skin streaked with soot, yet her eyes, those eyes, were unbroken, steady as if daring the world to try again. They rested in silence, broken only by the horse's wheezing breaths and the distant call of a night bird. Elias pressed his hand to his side where blood seeped through torn cloth. He felt weak, the wound reminding him of his age, of the many scars layered one atop another, each carrying a memory of failure or violence. Nala reached out, her fingers light on his arm, her voice ragged but sure. "You carry shame," she said, not as a question but as fact. He looked at her, surprised, but could not deny it. The memories he bore, many had left to die. Choices made in the name of survival, rose like smoke inside him. He shook his head, unable to find words. She watched him, her gaze piercing, and whispered, "Shame is only heavy if you never set it down." Her resilience astonished him. Here was a woman who had been broken in body, abandoned, nearly burned alive, and yet she spoke as though she were the one carrying him. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet hers, and busied himself checking the revolver, counting the few rounds left. But he knew rest would not last. Outlaws did not let prey slip without pursuit. Somewhere behind them, Crow's rage would be stoking hotter than the flames they had escaped. Elias could feel it in his bones, the way a man feels the approach of a storm. He glanced toward the canyon mouth where starlight silvered the ridges. "They'll come," he muttered. Nala's lips curved into something between a grim smile and a sneer. "Then let them." By dawn, the sound of hooves reached them, dull echoes bouncing off stone walls. Elias helped Nala onto the horse once more, steadying her slender frame in the saddle. He mounted behind, his arm firm around her to hold her upright. In her lap he placed a rifle, its barrel worn but true. She cradled it as though it belonged to her hands, though her legs could not guide her. The canyon funneled the riders toward them. Crow led, his beard singed, his eyes wild with the kind of fury that only humiliation breeds. His men fanned out behind, half a dozen shadows raising dust. The morning sun cut across the canyon floor, turning every grain of sand into sparks of gold, as if the earth itself braced for blood. Crow's voice cracked the stillness. "Mercer," he roared, drawing his revolver high. "You think you can steal my fire? You think you can make me a fool in front of a whole town?" His laughter was jagged. "I'll string you both from the same tree, and let the buzzards decide which one's worth the meat." Elias said nothing. Words were wasted on men like Crow. He steadied Nala's hands around the rifle, his own blood dampening her sleeve. She turned her head slightly, her dark hair brushing his cheek, and spoke low. "There, above the ridge, the second rider. He hides his aim." Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. Elias shifted, raised his Colt, and fired. The outlaw toppled backward with a scream, tumbling from the saddle. The canyon erupted. Gunfire cracked, echoing like thunder between the cliffs. Elias ducked low, shielding Nala as bullets sparked off stone around them. She lifted the rifle, sighting carefully despite the jolt of recoil when Elias steadied her against his chest. Her shot rang true. One of Crow's men pitched forward, his horse galloping raiderless into the dust. The fight raged in bursts, smoke curling in the narrow air, the stench of powder mixing with sweat and blood. Elias fired again and again, each shot bringing a flash of memory, soldiers screaming, fire consuming camps, his own feet running while others fell. But this time he did not run. This time he stood, even if it meant dying in this canyon. Crow advanced, relentless, his revolver spitting fire. A bullet tore past Elias's ear, another grazed his thigh, but still he held Nala steady, guiding her aim. Their movements fused. Together they were something more, her eyes, his strength, their survival tied by a thread of trust neither had asked for but both accepted. Then Crow dismounted, stomping through the dust with pistol in hand, his eyes fixed on Elias. "You," he spat. "Always the quiet ones think they can play hero." He raised the revolver, aiming straight for Elias's heart. Before Elias could react, Nala spoke, not with fear but with steel. "I know you," she said, her voice carrying across the canyon. "You mock the helpless because you are hollow inside. But you will not have this man. Not today." Crow sneered, finger tightening on the trigger. Elias braced, lifting his revolver though his arm shook. But Nala pressed the rifle tighter, her voice low enough only for Elias to hear. "Do not miss." Elias squeezed, and Crow staggered as the bullet tore through his chest. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide, mouth open as though the fire inside him had finally consumed itself. His revolver clattered uselessly to the sand. He fell forward, face first, dust rising to swallow him. The canyon fell silent except for the moans of the wounded and the retreat of surviving outlaws, their courage broken with their leader. Elias's breath came ragged, his wounds throbbing, but he remained upright, his arms still firm around Nala. It was then she turned her face toward him, her eyes shining not with tears but with something older, deeper. "The boy who once saved you. He was my brother." The word struck him harder than any bullet. He stared, stunned, as memory unfurled, the sharp-eyed youth who had given him water in the desert, who had spared a stranger's life. And now, here was his sister, paralyzed yet unyielding, returned to claim a debt Elias had never known how to pay. His rescue of her was no accident. It was the circle closing, the desert's quiet hand guiding him back to redemption. He bowed his head, unable to speak, his throat thick. But she touched his arm lightly, her voice softer now. "You have paid, Elias Mercer. Not with death, but with fire." Word spread quickly in the weeks that followed. The town whispered of the rancher who rode through a burning barn to carry a woman out alive, who faced Crow's gang in a canyon and left their leader in the dust. They spoke, too, of the Apache woman who, though bound by broken legs, wielded a rifle with the spirit of a warrior and the eyes of an eagle. Nala lived, scarred but unbroken, her legend woven into the songs her people told under starlight. Elias returned to his quiet ranch, though he was no longer just a gray ghost at its edge. He was remembered. He was spoken of. And in those stories, he found a measure of peace. For in the end, he was not the man who had left others to die. He was the man who rode through fire to save the one no one else would. And that was enough to lay the shame down at last.